Good morning.
Good morning.
That's Paul McKay, manager of the King's Co-op Bookstore in the basement of the University of King's College. Paul is opening up for the day, pulling back the metal barricade that runs across the corner of a hallway that is the actual store. It's a busy time of year for a university bookstore, so we're here early, before the rush, to find out more about Canada's hardest to find indie bookstore. Welcome back to This is King's Podcast, the podcast that explores all that makes the small East Coast University of King's College in Halifax, Nova Scotia wonderful, sometimes a little weird, always unique. I'm Pauline Dakin. I teach in the School of Journalism, Writing and Publishing here at King's. And it's a new term, and like the students, we're back after a summer hiatus. It's a great time of year. The air is crisper, the campus has come back to life again, and students are looking for books for all of their classes. That's where Paul McKay comes in. He's been getting ready for the fall term for months. Paul, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
So, what's going on in the bookstore right now?
We just survived the back-to-school rush, which the first week of September, all the students come in, both from King's and Dal, and we spend about a month getting all the books ready for everyone for that crazy influx of people who need that book, and they need it now. So last week, we sold just over $100,000 worth of books in 7 days, which was just madness.
That's a whole lot of busyness in a fairly contained space. I should get you to describe the bookstore.
Yeah, so we're a very unique bookstore. We are essentially in a found space on campus, which was basically just a hallway. So our space, since it's a public area, we have all these sort of bookshelves that close up and lock at the end of the day. And so we're essentially a pop-up shop that pops up every day, which is very different. I don't think there's a single bookstore that has our sort of, moving and opening bookshelf system that we do.
Yeah, it's quite ingenious. When I see it closed, you've got the gate across the corner, but then all of these sort of shelves on wheels.
Yeah, and for last week in particular, students have come down to use the bathroom or something when the bookstore was closed, and they didn't quite understand what this space was. But then they came in the next day when it was open, and just the wide-eyed, oh my gosh, what is this? This is kind of magical. And we get we don't think about it that often because it's something we do every day, but there is sort of a magical element to it that people really resonates with people.
I think we need to get an open and closed picture to put up with this episode of the
absolutely.
podcast so people can get a sense of this. You've had this big back-to-school rush, but this is not just a bookstore where students come to get their texts, right?
Yeah, so unlike most, basically forget everything you know about a university bookstore, and that's kind of what we are. So rather than just being the place where you get textbooks and your sweaters and your mugs, we're actually a fully independent bookstore like any other kind of bookstore. So we function for the community as well. We have a selection of fiction and nonfiction. We do special orders for people. So instead of shopping on Amazon, you can go to our website and we can order any book that's in print. And by doing that, there's no extra cost for it. No shipping costs, things like that. And your money is staying in your community. It's going towards us doing more sorts of events and supporting our community. We do a lot of donations to the community, things like that.
It's called a co-op bookstore. What's the significance of that?
Yeah, so when the bookstore started, King's never had a bookstore, first of all. So for the foundation year program, for those that don't know about it, is about 45 different books, which can be quite a challenge to source those on your own. So I believe it was one of the other bookstores in town was handling that for years, but then it became too much for them. And so they had to kind of quit doing it. And then the Dal bookstore took it over, and they didn't have enough copies of the book, and there were all sorts of issues with that. So the students at King's decided, we need and deserve our own bookstore. And students got together and sort of made this co-op and then birthed the bookstore almost 20 years ago at this point. And so the store is owned and operated by students. So there's a board of current students and then community members that oversee the running of the bookstore. And because of that, we're not owned by King's. We're beholden to no one, which is a great sort of system to be in. And since we're owned and operated by students, the students are our first priority. So getting the textbooks as quickly and easily and as cheaply as possible for students to make things as easy for them as possible. And we kind of operate in a service capacity. most university bookstores aren't looked at as a service. They're a means to make money for the university. We're not that at all. So our first priority is to just be here, get what the students need. If we lose some money because we order too many textbooks and have to return them, that's on us. We're here to support the students.
So the students are the boss, and you're the curator.
Basically, yeah.
It's quite delightful to watch people come in and realize what there is in this bookstore. What's your philosophy about curating that bookstore?
Yeah, it's kind of, curation is a hard thing to talk about because it's almost like an art to it. Just from being there as much as I am, we kind of see what our steady usual clientele is and what things that they like and what they might not resonate with. And then I try to kind of just feel what the pulse is of who's coming in and what kind of books fit what our current, I don't want to use the word vibe, but that's kind of the word. What would kind of resonate with people that are already coming and what's going on in the community at large that might resonate with people as well. A lot of it is just, does this seem cool? And there are certain books that the publishers put out their lists every fall. This hot new release, you're going to want this, you're going to want this. So there was one conversation where someone said to me, if you order one $80 Vietnamese cookbook this year, make it this one. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to order these sorts of things. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to talk about with any sort of rules to it. It's just, does this kind of fit with the ethos, the politics of the bookstore? And is this a great book to have in your life and in the store? A lot of bookstores don't carry back a lot of backlist titles, which are the sort of not current titles. So we try to, an overarching ethos would be sort of the best books you need to read within your life, basically.
You really love books.
I do.
You read a lot yourself.
I do.
How much does that inform what we get to see at King's?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there is basically just my personal tastes that I personally think this is good, and we will sell books based on that because people will come in and they'll ask for book recommendations, and it's a lot easier to talk about books and to sell books that you are passionate about. There's a certain book that I really love, book of short stories by George Saunders, that was never in the bookstore before I took over. And then once I took over, I thought, well, no, I need this book here because this book is amazing. And you can see that the sales took off of this book. And it wasn't a new book when I brought it in either. It's just, if you're passionate about something, you can sell it, and then people react to that passion. We're such an online, culture nowadays that you can get anything you want at any moment at the click of a button, and there's almost too much choice. Like if you go on Amazon, for instance, and you search up something, you'll get ads for all these other various things, and they will have access to almost every book available, but you don't get that passion of someone who actually knows anything about it, and people are really kind of craving that nowadays, I find.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Amazon, which people jokingly call the river that washes everything away, right? How is the bookstore doing in the world of e-readers and online shopping?
Yeah, so e-readers were, when they first came out, they were going to be the thing that killed bookstores entirely. And it sent sort of a shockwave through the publishing and bookstore world. But it didn't quite happen in the way that people thought. There's just something really important and tactile and magical even about having a book in your hand. And there have been studies done that you actually retain more information from a physical book than an ebook. So a lot of professors and teachers still prefer to have the physical books, for instance, for that reason. So e-readers didn't really hurt as much as they thought. Online shopping is the one that is quite difficult to fight against because it's just so ubiquitous. We're all very busy. If you can get something delivered to your house while you're working a 40-hour a week job and you're getting your groceries, doing your bills, I understand the value of that. And I would never tell someone to not do that if that's what makes sense for them. But people are hungry for that sort of personal touch and that curation. The difficult part is, this is something that I find kind of funny. Like, we all like getting a good deal. If you go to a thrift store and you buy a shirt for $5, and you go tell everybody, like, look at this shirt, it's great. And I love that. But that sort of personal shopping, kind of finding a deal, has been transferred to this horrible company that is literally the worst company on earth, for how they treat their employees, how they treat anybody. They boss other businesses around. and they're just awful. And people will come in and say, oh, well, I could get this $1 cheaper on Amazon, so I'll do that. And I'm like, well, sure, but you can also get other things much cheaper if you rely on like sweatshop labor or other terrible business practices like that. So we try to just sort of be a bit of an antidote to that in how we operate and just try to inform people that might not be aware of just how bad a company it actually is.
Mm-hmm. And how good your bookstore is.
That too.
Have you got a current favorite recommendations? Because, book lovers love a good recommendation, right?
My favorite book of the past year, I think, is it's called There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension by Hanif Abdurraqib. And for anyone who knows me, I am not a sports guy. Like, I'm a book guy. I'm a music guy. Sports are not my thing. But Hanif is one of the most brilliant writers alive right now. If you're listening to this and you haven't read anything by Hanif Abdurraqib, do yourself a favor and pick up literally any one of his books. And they're just that good. And this book, you don't need to like basketball or care about sports to get into this book. The overarching theme of it is Hanif grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, around the time when LeBron James was a high school basketball player and was this phenomenon that people kind of were starting to take notice of. And then he became one of the biggest stars in the world. And it's all about who gets to make it in the world and who doesn't, who had the opportunities, who didn't, and how that kind of affects the community that he is from. And he ties in, every one of his books is about one thing, but he ties in a lot of personal stories from his life and from people in his life, his friends and family. And they're hard to describe, but they're just so incredibly good that I can't say enough good things about this book. And I'm actually, next week, I'm flying to Toronto just to go to a book event to meet him. That's how good he is. And I will go that far, and I wouldn't do that for, I don't know about anybody else at this moment.
Interesting. How do you spell Hanif's last name for people who might want to pick that up?
Yeah, Abdurraqib. Hanif Abdurraqib.
Abdurraqib. Okay. Thanks for that, Paul. And, we shouldn't let you go without talking just a little bit about you, the guy behind the counter in the bookstore. What brought you here?
Yeah, so I have a very odd trajectory. A lot of the times you'll meet someone who works in a bookstore and they're like, oh, I wanted to run a bookstore my whole life and now I finally did it, or this is my dream job. So I went to school for music. I went to Mount Allison, actually, and double majored in psychology and music. And then I went to school for jazz. So I wanted to be a jazz guitarist and be a professor, and that was my dream. I would get up in the morning and I would grab the guitar and I would play for 12 hours straight, and then I'd go to bed and I'd repeat, which is not healthy. And because of that and some other issues, I ended up injuring my arm, kind of a repetitive strain sort of thing. So that kind of goal in life was taken away from me. And I got a job at a bookstore where I could shelve books with one hand while I kind of nursed my bad arm. And from there, I kind of discovered how much I did still like reading and was introduced to like some of the best literature going. And it was really, books were sort of a savior at that point because I lost everything that I had been going for and would spend all my time doing. If you can't do that, what are you going to fill your time with? And then I got promoted through that bookstore and, moved to Halifax, transferred to another one. And then a friend of mine told me about this bookstore opening up, that they needed someone else. And I wasn't really happy with what I was doing at the time. So I thought, I'll go do this. The prognosis at the time was not good, that the bookstore was not in great shape. But I thought, okay, I'll give it everything I have. And then if it doesn't work out, I'll go on EI and figure out my next move.
So instead of 12 hours of guitar playing, it was, 14 hours of bookstore.
Basically, yeah. Let's try to turn this thing around. And so the prognosis was that it would have to close in 6 months without a real kind of change in how things were done. And I'm happy to say that was almost 10 years ago now.
Wow. Yeah. So going forward, any vision or plans for the future?
We're going to keep doing what we're doing as far as like supporting the student books, getting more people in the community. We're doing more and more book events every day too, which is great. Something that we recently started doing is the Books and Brews Adult Book Fair, which kind of harkens back to the Scholastic Book Fair of your youth. We go to a different bar in the city and we kind of lay out all of our new and hot books. And people come in, grab a beer with their friends, snoop some books. The last one we did had a lineup around the block just to get in. It took about an hour for people to get in, and people were happy to wait around the block for books, which was an incredible thing to see.
That's wonderful.
So we're always looking to do very interesting things like that. Bring the books to the community, and then also bring the community to the bookstore, whether in person or shopping online at our website, which is kingsbookstore.ca.
And many people who go to book events in Halifax may recognize the tall, slim guy with the beard as the guy selling the books for the author who is launching. So you do quite a bit of that as well.
We do a lot of that, yeah. And we did it a decent amount, and then COVID happened and book events completely ended for everybody, and that was kind of difficult. But now we're kind of through the worst of that. More events are happening, that more publishers see the value of bringing authors to our community. And one of the things that we do at the bookstore is we partner with other book festivals and publishers to bring authors here who normally wouldn't come here. So there are certain authors, like we had Joshua Whitehead come here, which was amazing. And that is not because the publisher paid him to come, that's we paid him to come. And, one of the things, if you support our bookstore, money goes to those sorts of things to bring these authors and these events to your community, where other online retailers won't do things like that.
This would be something where students would have a voice in how any profit of the store might be spent, eh?
Absolutely, yeah. So any profit that we actually make just gets reinvested into the bookstore, whether it's in increasing the stock of the store, increasing staff wages, doing more book events, things like that.
Okay. And we shouldn't end without saying, it's not the easiest place in the world to find. Do you want to sort of give us the guide to finding the King's Bookstore?
Yeah, so we're in the basement of one of the buildings on campus, which if you know the campus, it's not very big. So it's easy to find if you know where it is. But for anyone who hasn't been on campus, you put in sort of the Google Maps directions and you just get to this nebulous place you've never been, and there's no signs anywhere really. So if you come to campus, you just kind of go around the corner to the academic building, and we do have a sign now, finally, after almost 20 years, that kind of helps people find us. But we kind of rely on word of mouth a little bit. Like if you come here and you can't find us, there's students everywhere, just ask anybody, and they'll point you in the right direction. And people who were never here before, the elevator would open up, which also opens up directly into the bookstore, which is kind of fun. People would stumble out of the elevator and say, "Oh my God, I found it. You're so hard to find." And so that led me to just kind of brand us, let's run with it. We're Canada's hardest to find bookstore. We try to make it worth it when you get here, but you might have a hard time at first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely worth the trip. Paul, thanks very much.
Thank you.
I hope you're slightly less busy in the weeks ahead. Paul McKay is the manager of the King's Co-op Bookstore. He's rushing off to finish opening for the day's rush. There's a great video shot a few years back by former King's journalism professor Susan Newhook that shows how this found space bookstore works. Check it out in the episode notes. You can also see pictures and events from the bookstore at their Instagram page, King's Co-op Bookstore. Thanks for listening. If you are a King's alum or student or just interested in campus life, follow us and give us a like. We drop a new episode on the usual streaming platforms every month during the academic year. I'm Pauline Dakin. Thanks to my co-producer and technician, Mark Pinio, and thanks to you for listening. To all the students out there, still feeling all fresh and shiny before the work piles on, have a great term.